He suspected his chef was stealing from him. For 3 weeks, he watched her slip out with bags she didn't bring in. So, one rainy night, he followed her, ready to catch her in the act. What he discovered left him speechless. Eugene Wallace was 48 years old and owned a slice of Manhattan's skyline. He noticed everything, every market shift, every deal's fine print, every inefficiency, except the woman who sustained him. Her name was Agnes. She'd been in his penthouse kitchen since his first big merger. When his marriages crumbled, she adjusted his meals without a word. When board battles raged, she kept his energy steady. She cared for him when he couldn't care for himself. But Eugene never inquired about her world, never wondered what filled her evenings. She was just there, efficient, loyal, unseen. Until 3 weeks ago, Eugene noticed Agnes departing his building at dusk, laden with 2 bulky bags she hadn't carried in at dawn. It repeated. Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, same bags, same hour. His thoughts darkened. She's smuggling something. He audited the kitchen stock. Pantry, fridge, supplies. Nothing absent. But those bags persisted, and the puzzle gnawed. What's she concealing? So on a stormy Tuesday evening, Eugene resolved to trail her. He skipped his late meeting, idled his sedan around the corner, watched. When Agnes emerged, coat buttoned against the chill, bags straining her arms, Eugene's pulse quickened. Tonight, he'd uncover the facts. She trudged through the slick streets, deep into districts his firm had eyed for redevelopment, blocks he'd gentrified and emptied of locals. She boarded a southbound bus. Eugene tailed in traffic. She alighted at a faded corner, veered into an alley beside a shuttered grocer, bricks worn and lamps flickering. Agnes unlocked a side door. Warmth leaked out. Eugene lingered, then crept in after. The basement hummed with life. Elderly folks, weary parents, kids in patched clothes, all sharing stew from mismatched bowls. And there was Agnes, headscarf off, apron tied, ladling portions at a makeshift stove, greeting faces by name, her face alight in a way Eugene had never witnessed. An older woman approached. "Agnes, got extra veggies tonight?" "Saved some just for you, Doris." She passed a steaming serving. A boy pulled at her skirt. "Where's the food from?" Agnes bent low. "From folks who care, Randy, so you can keep growing tall." Eugene's breath caught. Those bags weren't pilfered. They were shared. Agnes was pouring her modest wage into nourishing those with less. People his expansions had sidelined. She could have sought his aid, but she hadn't, because after 7 years, she'd judged something in him. She didn't believe he'd grasp her compassion. Eugene retreated up the steps, rain drenching his wool suit. He idled 2 hours in his car. When Agnes finally surfaced, bags deflated, gait weary, Eugene lowered his window. "Agnes," she halted. No shock, just weary acceptance. "Get in," she complied. They rode wordlessly. Then Eugene's tone fractured. "How long?" Agnes gazed at the passing lights. 14 years since my husband passed. He'd wired condolences for that loss. Never probed the details. "Why keep it from me?" She met his eyes. "What would you have changed?" Her words were gentle, yet piercing. "I needed it to stay real. Not your project." Something shattered in Eugene's core. He escorted her to a modest row house on the fringes, faded siding under streetlight glow. Inside, a photo caught his eye. Agnes, younger, amid kids outside charred ruins. A fire-ravaged complex. The woman who prepped his gourmet spreads had rebuilt lives from ashes. And he'd never known. Before we continue, consider sharing this tale if it resonates. Perhaps it's here to shift a perspective, to mend an oversight. Stick around. What unfolds next will transform it all. Eugene didn't return to his tower that night. He lingered in his sedan outside Agnes's home until dawn crept in. The downpour eased, the streets hushed, and all he could fixate on was that framed image on her wall. Charred homes, saved futures. She'd mended so much, and he'd never posed a single query about her essence. When he finally steered back to his penthouse, dawn gilded the Hudson. The doorman nodded as always. Lights dimmed on cue. Elevator ascended silently. But now it all rang hollow, sterile, like a fortress mimicking warmth. Eugene paused at his panoramic view, surveying the horizon. His horizon. Edifices etched with his legacy. Spires that redefined the grid. But what had he truly erected? He pondered Agnes. 7 years. She'd anchored his chaos. He recalled his first divorce at 41, papers signed in a haze. She'd prepped nourishing broths, unprompted. He recalled a brutal takeover at 45, nights blurring. She'd tailored low-sodium feasts per his doctor's orders. He recalled turning 47, alone with a cake she'd baked, her quiet, many happy returns, the day's sole warmth. And he'd amassed fortunes, stamped Wallace on skylines, but never once checked if she was fulfilled, never asked what she required, never confirmed her well-being. The insight weighed like lead. Eugene heard the entry latch, soft treads in the corridor. Agnes arrived, punctual as ever, steadfast, unobtrusive. He pivoted from the vista toward the kitchen. She arranged his morning spread, espresso, oats, berries sliced precisely, the ritual she'd upheld for years. But this dawn, Eugene perceived her anew, her frame slight, resilient, a figure who'd dished hope to the overlooked last night. A guardian the city ignored. "Morning, Mr. Wallace," she murmured, eyes averted. "Agnes." She stilled. His timbre prompted a glance. "You all right, sir?" Eugene yearned to unload it all, to atone, to justify, to interrogate her silence, but words lodged. "I'm okay," he whispered. "Just a rough night." Agnes inclined her head, decanted his brew, placed it delicately, and Eugene grasped something gut-wrenching. She still addressed him as Sir, still navigated him with deference, as if he were a charge to tend, not a confidant. After everything, after sustaining him, piecing his fragments, she hadn't felt secure enough for candor. He directed that barrier unknowingly. Agnes moved to depart, and Eugene's words halted her. "Agnes?" She pivoted. "Yes, Mr. Wallace." He regarded her, truly, and beheld an enigma, a life he'd overlooked. A beacon faded by time, a widow who'd channeled loss into light, and he'd confined her to someone who balanced his macros. "Thank you," he uttered, voice wavering, "for all of it." Agnes's expression eased briefly. Then she dipped her chin. "Naturally, sir." She exited, leaving Eugene solitary in his impeccable kitchen, in his flawless eyrie, in his unassailable domain, feeling utterly destitute. He drew his device, scanned his agenda, summits, mergers, portfolio audits, his hours segmented into quarters, but none compelled. Eugene dismissed the schedule, launched a blank note, and inscribed one query. Who is Agnes? It was the first genuine inquiry he'd voiced in 7 years, and he couldn't fathom its toll. Eugene lost his edge. He perched in his corner suite on the 58th floor, eyeing a prospectus valued at $200 million. The figures swam. All he could summon was Agnes, his aide rapped. "Mr. Wallace, the Tokyo syndicate's on the line." "Reschedule," she faltered. "But this was locked in months back." I said, "Reschedule." She withdrew softly. Eugene reclined, shut his lids. Charred ruins. Rebuilt hopes. Agnes had fortified communities post-catastrophe, and he hadn't known she'd endured her own. He booted his system, keyed her name into the engine. Agnes, last name Community Aid. Scant results emerged, obscure aid logs, a roster of quiet volunteers from a decade past. Her name listed, but no spotlight, no acclaim, no echo. Society had overlooked her, mirroring his neglect. Eugene pocketed his keys, donned his overcoat, informed his aide he was out for the day. "It's barely noon, sir." "I'm aware." He drove south, back to that alley, back to the enclave he'd only charted in acquisition maps and yield forecasts. Under sun, it transformed, elders on stoops, youths in playgrounds, a vendor hawking wares, lives pulsed here. Tangible souls, not data points, not redevelopment hurdles. Eugene stationed near the grocer. Descended those familiar stairs. The side door yielded. Within, it lay still, serene. Just collapsible setups along walls and a compact range tucked away. Stew's aroma clung faintly. Eugene lingered, envisioning Agnes in this haven, portioning sustenance, beaming at the forsaken, etching names in memory. "Need something?" Eugene wheeled. A sturdy man framed the threshold, same worn jacket from the prior eve. "Greg?" "I was just," Eugene trailed. "Exploring." Greg appraised him. Awareness sparked. "You were here last night, in the shadows," Eugene affirmed. "You're the mogul, aren't you? The one behind half these towers." "I am." Greg folded his arms. "So why here?" Eugene lacked a retort. "I'm seeking to comprehend something." "Comprehend what?" "Agnes, the woman who anchors this." Greg's demeanor thawed marginally. "Agnes doesn't anchor it. She just appears. Has for years, nourishes us, listens, makes us feel seen." "How long have you known her?" 5 years, since my layoff." Greg's features hardened. "Factory closed. Your firm's doing, actually. Ended up on curbs, no prospects." He approached the range, grazed it reverently. "Agnes spotted me panhandling near here one dusk, offered a meal, no prying, just presence till I opened up." Eugene sensed a pang. "She linked me to resources," Greg went on. "Secured temp work. Still checks in." He eyed Eugene. "She turned my tide. No obligation." The phrase echoed. "She's been doing this for 14 years, Eugene murmured. Greg pivoted. "What?" "Since her husband's death, she's channeled grief into this, saving lives quietly, one bowl at a time." The rain came down in sheets, turning the Manhattan streets into a slick mosaic of neon reflections. Eugene Wallace gripped the steering wheel of his black sedan, his knuckles pale against the leather. He'd parked half a block from the service exit of his penthouse tower, engine idling low, wipers slicing through the deluge. It was Tuesday evening, just past dusk. The pattern he'd memorized. Agnes would emerge any moment now. There she was, bundled in a threadbare coat over her chef's uniform, headscarf knotted tight. She stepped out into the storm. 2 bags dangled from her hands, one brown paper. crumpled and heavy with whatever secrets it held. The other plastic, translucent enough to hint at shapes inside. Her shoulders hunched against the wind. She set off down the sidewalk, her worn, rubber-soled shoes splashing through puddles that soaked her hems. Eugene waited until she was a safe distance ahead, then eased the car into gear. He followed at a crawl, headlights off to blend with the traffic's glow. The city lights blurred like oil on water, yellow taxis, red taillights, the distant hum of Times Square fading behind them. Agnes walked with purpose, unhurried, as if the rain were just another ingredient in her day. Eugene's polished Oxfords would have been ruined in seconds out there. He imagined the cold seeping through her thin soles, but she didn't falter. The contrast gnawed at him. Here he was in climate-controlled luxury, trailing a woman who'd never asked for more than her paycheck. His world was boardrooms and balance sheets. Hers, apparently, extended into this murky unknown. As they moved south, the neighborhoods shifted. Gleaming skyscrapers gave way to older blocks, cracked sidewalks, graffiti-tagged walls, corner bodegas with flickering signs. Eugene knew these areas from financial reports. High vacancy rates, prime for redevelopment, low acquisition costs. But seeing them like this, alive with huddled pedestrians and steam rising from grates, made his stomach twist. This wasn't his domain. Agnes paused at a bus stop, rain pattering on the shelter's cracked plexiglass. Eugene pulled over, heart pounding. Public transit? He hadn't ridden a bus in decades. When the M15 rumbled up, belching exhaust, she boarded without a glance back. Eugene hesitated, his sedan too conspicuous now. Swearing under his breath, he locked the car and jogged through the downpour, suit jacket flapping, water soaking his collar. He slipped on just as the doors hissed shut, dropping coins into the fare box with fumbling fingers. The bus smelled of damp wool and fast food, passengers swaying with every lurch. He kept to the back, head down, watching Agnes through the crowd. She sat midway, bags clutched on her lap, staring out at the passing streets. Discomfort bloomed in Eugene's chest. The press of strangers, the erratic stops, the unfamiliar route plunging deeper into the Bronx fringes. Fear flickered too. What if she spotted him? What if this led somewhere dangerous? His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his assistant about tomorrow's merger. But he ignored it. This was due diligence, he told himself. Patterns demanded answers. The bus groaned to a halt at a dimly lit corner, rain hammering the roof. Agnes stood, maneuvered her bags, and exited. Eugene followed at a distance, collar upturned, feet slipping on wet pavement. The neighborhood here felt forgotten. Old brick tenements sagging under years, street lamps casting erratic pools of light. A closed grocery store with barred windows. Agnes turned down a narrow alley beside it, shadows swallowing her form. Eugene's pulse raced. Alleys meant trouble, muggings, deals gone wrong. He lingered at the mouth, rain dripping from his hair, debating. Then, the faint click of a key in a lock. She vanished through a side door. He counted to 30, breath shallow, then approached. The door was plain metal, rusted at the edges. His hand hovered over the handle. What lay beyond? Theft? Something worse? With a deep breath, he turned it. The door creaked open, and warm light spilled out, carrying the scent of simmering broth and quiet voices. Eugene stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind him like a secret sealed. The warmth hit him first. A cocoon of steam and soft yellow light from hanging bulbs, chasing away the alley's chill. Folding tables stretched along the cinder-block walls, covered in mismatched cloths. Pots bubbled on portable stoves, filling the air with the aroma of hearty stew, fresh bread, and something herbal that reminded him of Agnes's kitchen experiments. But this wasn't his penthouse. This was a hidden haven, alive with murmurs and the clink of spoons against bowls. People filled the space, 24 or so, huddled in groups. Elderly folks with canes propped nearby, women with tired eyes cradling mugs, children fidgeting on benches. No chaos, just a quiet rhythm of sharing. And at the center, moving like a conductor in her element, was Agnes. She'd shed her coat, sleeves rolled up on her uniform, apron dusted with flour. Her face, usually a mask of quiet efficiency, glowed with animation. She laughed, a soft, genuine sound Eugene had never heard, as she ladled portions, touching arms gently, exchanging nods. She remembered them all, not as faces, but as lives. "Here you go, Doris," Agnes said, handing a steaming bowl to an elderly woman with silver braids and a walker. "Extra carrots, just like you like. How's the hip today?" Doris smiled faintly, her wrinkled hands trembling as she accepted it. "Holding up, thanks to you, Aggie. Wouldn't make it without these nights." Agnes turned to a burly man in a faded flannel shirt, Greg from the snippets Eugene caught, piling bread onto his plate. "Greg, take an extra roll for tomorrow. I heard about the job interview." "You'll knock 'em dead." Greg grunted a thanks, his eyes softening. "Appreciate it. Since the plant shut down, well, you know." A lanky teen, Randy, darted between tables with a tray, helping serve. "Miss Agnes, we're low on spoons," he called, and she directed him to a cabinet with a wink. "You're a lifesaver, Randy." "How's school treating you?" Eugene lingered in the shadows by the door, his suit dripping rainwater onto the concrete floor. The bags Agnes had carried lay open on a counter, brown paper unfolded to reveal loaves, vegetables, canned goods, plastic spilling fruits and staples. Not stolen from his kitchen. No, these were fresh groceries, bought with intention. His suspicion curdled into confusion. This wasn't theft. It was sacrifice. He edged closer, overhearing fragments. "Ever since Wallace Corp bought out the block," Greg muttered to Doris, "rents skyrocketed. Half the neighborhood's gone." Doris nodded. "My building's next. Developers don't see us, just dollar signs." Wallace Corp, his company. Eugene's throat tightened. These people, displaced by his expansions, his progress, found refuge here, in a basement fed by his own chef. Agnes straightened suddenly, her gaze locking onto him across the room. The ladle paused mid-scoop. No gasp, no alarm, just a flicker of resignation in her eyes, as if she'd half expected this intrusion. The room's hum dipped, a few heads turning. Eugene froze, words failing. She set the ladle down, wiped her hands on her apron, and approached slowly. Up close, in this light, she looked smaller, wearier, but unbreakable. "You followed me," she said softly, not a question. He nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "I had to know." Her eyes held his, heavy with unspoken years. No anger, just a quiet sorrow that pierced deeper than any accusation. She glanced back at the tables, the faces depending on her, then turned away without another word. She gathered her empty bags, slipped on her coat, and slipped out the door into the rain. The basement resumed its rhythm, but Eugene stood rooted, shaken to his core. The truth settled like lead. Agnes wasn't taking. She was giving everything she had to mend what he'd broken. Eugene lingered in the basement long after Agnes's departure, the warmth of the room now feeling like a reproach. Conversations ebbed around him, Doris sipping her stew, Greg tearing into bread, Randy stacking bowls. But he was an intruder, a shadow in a suit amid patched coats and weary resilience. The air grew thick with unspoken questions, eyes flicking his way. Finally, he slipped out into the rain, the door's creak echoing his hollow chest. He drove home in silence, the city's lights smearing across his windshield like accusations. That night, sleep evaded him. Eugene paced his penthouse, the Hudson River glittering mockingly below. The king-sized bed, with its Egyptian cotton sheets, felt like a cage. He poured a scotch, stared at the skyline he'd conquered, but all he saw was Agnes's resigned gaze. How had he missed this? 7 years, and she'd been a ghost in his life. Present, yet invisible. Memories surfaced unbidden, fragments of her quiet service. His first divorce, 3 years in, he'd staggered home late, tie askew, appetite gone. Agnes had left a covered plate, simple chicken soup, laced with herbs that eased his headache without a word. No questions, no pity, just sustenance. Then the boardroom coup at 45, when rivals nearly ousted him. She'd adjusted his meals to low-carb, high-protein, slipping in notes about portions. For focus, one read. He'd crumpled it, never thanking her. Last year, after a grueling acquisition, he'd found a thermos of chamomile on his desk during an all-nighter. Her doing, always anticipating, never imposing. By dawn, resolve hardened. This wasn't about audits or ledgers. Eugene needed to know Agnes, the person, not the employee. He called his HR director, voice clipped. Pull her file. Personal details, not performance. The folder arrived digitally, sparse. Hired 7 years ago via a discreet agency. References glowing but vague. Address in the outer boroughs. Marital status, widowed. Husband deceased 14 years prior. Cause unspecified. No children listed. Salary modest. No raises requested. But patterns emerged in the margins. Consistent, unclaimed PTO. Medical benefits barely touched. Fragments pieced together. A quick search, discreet through public records, revealed her husband's obituary. A factory worker, killed in an industrial accident. No lawsuit, no settlement. Agnes had vanished from public view shortly after, resurfacing only in community logs. Whispers in old neighborhood forums. She'd started a soup line in that very basement, feeding the displaced long before Eugene's developments accelerated the exodus. Mid-morning, Eugene returned to the alley, the rain reduced to a drizzle. The side door was unlocked, the basement empty save for stacked tables and the faint scent of last night's meal. Footsteps echoed. 2 figures emerged from a back room. A stocky man in overalls, Terry, wiping his hands, and a wiry woman with gray-streaked hair, Lillian, carrying a mop. "Can we help you?" Terry asked, suspicion etching his brow. Eugene cleared his throat. "I'm a friend of Agnes. Saw her work last night." Lillian's eyes narrowed, then softened. "You're the boss man. Wallace." He nodded, unease coiling. They shared reluctantly at first, then in rushes. Terry, laid off when Eugene's firm automated his warehouse. Agnes found me sleeping rough, brought food, then a lead on temp work. Saved my hide. Lillian, evicted after rents tripled post-gentrification. Grandkids in tow. She paid my first month's deposit out of pocket. Refused my payback. Said pass it on. More revelations. Agnes had turned down checks from do-gooder elites who'd stumbled upon the center. Doesn't want strings, Terry said. Pays from her own wage. Groceries, rent for this space. Stubborn as hell. Eugene's mind reeled. Her salary, his salary, funneled here, while she skipped doctor visits, lived simply. Why hide it? The answer dawned, bitter. She didn't trust him to understand. Not the empire builder, blind to the human cost. Secrecy wasn't fear. It was judgment. He wouldn't have seen the need, or worse, turned it into a tax write-off. As he left, the basement's empty echo followed him. Agnes had chosen silence because, in her eyes, he wasn't ready to listen. Eugene carried that realization like a weight through the following days, his empire's routines fracturing under its pressure. Board meetings blurred into irrelevance. Acquisition reports sat unread on his desk. He watched Agnes from afar in the kitchen, her movements as precise as ever, but now he saw the subtle signs, the slight hunch in her posture, the brief pauses where she steadied herself against the counter. He wanted to speak, to bridge the chasm he'd uncovered, but words failed him. How do you apologize for years of blindness? It happened on a crisp Monday morning. The penthouse kitchen bathed in the harsh light of the rising sun. Eugene had risen early, nursing a coffee at the island, pretending to review emails while stealing glances at her. Agnes chopped vegetables with rhythmic efficiency, prepping his usual omelet. Spinach, egg whites, a dash of turmeric for inflammation, as per his last physical. No fanfare, just quiet care. Then, a clatter. The knife slipped from her hand, bouncing off the marble. Agnes swayed, one hand clutching her chest, the other gripping the edge of the counter. Her face drained of color, breath coming in shallow gasps. "Mr. Wallace," she murmured, before her knees buckled. Eugene lunged forward, catching her just as she collapsed. "Agnes!" Her weight was feather-light in his arms, her body limp against him. Panic surged, heart racing. He shouted for his assistant via the intercom, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. "Stay with me," he whispered, lowering her to the floor, checking her pulse. It fluttered weakly under his touch. Sirens wailed in the distance, but time stretched agonizingly. The ambulance ride was a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. Eugene rode along, suit rumpled, holding her hand as paramedics hooked up monitors. "Possible cardiac event," one said, "blood pressures through the roof." At the hospital, they whisked her into the ER, leaving Eugene in the sterile waiting room, pacing amid beeps and muffled cries. His phone buzzed incessantly. Calls from the office, queries about delays, but he silenced it. For once, the empire could wait. Hours later, a doctor emerged, scrubs crisp, expression neutral. "Dr. Patel," her badge read. "Mr. Wallace, you're listed as her employer." Eugene nodded, throat dry. "She's stable for now, but it's serious. Untreated hypertension, early signs of heart strain, likely exacerbated by stress and neglect. She's been ignoring symptoms for years." Eugene's world tilted. "Neglect? What do you mean?" Dr. Patel glanced at her chart. Blood work shows nutritional inconsistencies, iron deficiency, vitamin gaps. She mentioned skipping appointments. No recent checkups, no meds filled. "We can treat it. Medication, lifestyle changes, but it's caught up with her. Another week, and it could have been a full stroke." Eugene sank into a chair, the vinyl creaking under him. Can I see her? In a bit, she's resting. The doctor paused. She asked about work, said she needs to finish the week's menu. Guilt knifed through him. Agnes, even now, thinking of his needs. When they let him in, the room was dim, machines humming softly. Agnes lay propped on pillows, IV dripping into her arm, her headscarf folded neatly on the side table. She looked frail, the lines on her face etched deeper, but her eyes were clear when they met his. "Agnes," he said, pulling up a chair. "What happened?" She managed a weak smile. "Just a spell. I'll be fine." "No," he pressed gently. "The doctor said hypertension, untreated. Why didn't you get help?" Her gaze drifted to the window, the city skyline mocking in its indifference. Silence stretched. Then she sighed. Couldn't afford the time off? Or the co-pays stacking up? A pause, heavy. The money went elsewhere. Groceries for the basement, rent for the space. A few families needed it more. Eugene's chest constricted. Her salary, funneled into hope for others, while her own body paid the price. "You should have told me. I could have helped, covered the bills, given you time." Agnes turned back, her eyes steady, devastating in their honesty. "You never asked." The words landed like a blow, simple and unadorned. No accusation in her tone, just fact. Eugene recoiled inwardly, memories flashing. Years of her service, his curt nods, his absorbed silences. He'd provided the paycheck, the benefits package, generous by corporate standards. But generosity? That was an illusion. Money had bought compliance, not connection. He'd been absent, a figurehead employer, blind to the human toll. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice cracking. "I should have seen, should have cared enough to ask." She reached out, her hand cool on his. "Not about sorry, Mr. Wallace. It's about seeing now." But her touch withdrew, the standoff lingering, not forgiveness, not yet. Just space, a quiet boundary he'd earned through neglect. Eugene left the room shaken, the hospital corridor blurring. Outside, he leaned against the wall, breath ragged. Agnes's body had broken under the weight of her sacrifices. Years of giving, invisible labor that sustained others while eroding her. And he'd enabled it. His wealth a shield against reality. Money hadn't made him generous. It had made him isolated, absent from the lives he touched. The midpoint of his unraveling hit hard. If he didn't change, this fracture would consume them both. Eugene wandered the hospital halls for what felt like hours. The fluorescent buzz a poor substitute for clarity. Agnes's words, "You never asked," echoed, an indictment of his absence. He couldn't fix this with a check or a directive. Change demanded more. By evening, he found himself driving south again, drawn back to the basement like a compass to true north. The rain had cleared, leaving puddles that mirrored the street lamp's glow. He parked blocks away, walking the rest, his polished shoes clicking against cracked pavement. The side door yielded to his push, the basement dimly lit by a single bulb. It was midday quiet, no steam, no crowds, just a few figures tidying up. Terry from before nodded warily, but it was the newcomers who drew Eugene in. Dwight, a lanky man in his 50s with calloused hands and a faded Union jacket, stacked chairs. Beside him, Ivan, broader and bearded, sorted canned goods, his movements deliberate despite a limp. "You're back," Terry said, not unkindly. "Agnes ain't here. She's resting." "I know," Eugene replied, voice low. "I came to listen, if you'll talk." The men exchanged glances. Dwight straightened, eyes narrowing. Listen to what? How Wallace Corp steamrolled our block? Bitterness laced his tone, not the awe Eugene was used to in boardrooms, but raw resentment. You erased Maple Street, my home since '85, now it's luxury condos. Eugene swallowed. Tell me. They did, over folding tables, with instant coffee steaming in styrofoam cups, the stories poured out. Dwight, a mechanic whose garage was bought out cheap, promises of relocation never fulfilled. Family scattered, wife to Jersey, kids crashing on couches. Ivan, a teacher whose school was demolished for a tech hub. Kids lost their anchor. Dropout rates spiked. And for what? Your innovation district? Others trickled in. A woman named Maria, whose bodega vanished. An elder, Mr. Chen, evicted from rent-controlled apartments, now flipped for millions. Entire neighborhoods erased, not by accident, but by Eugene's signatures on dotted lines. Reports he'd skimmed, deeming them viable, had uprooted lives. His name, spoken here, was a curse, not a brand. Wallace, Ivan spat, synonym for greed. Shaken, Eugene left, as dusk fell. Their faces burned into his mind. He visited Agnes next, her hospital room softened by twilight. She sat up, reading a worn paperback, IV still tethered. You look like you've seen ghosts, she said mildly. I have. He sat, recounting the basement tales. They blame me, rightly. Agnes set the book aside. And now you want to fix it? Write a check for my bills, maybe fund the center? He nodded eagerly. Let me help. It's the least— No. Her voice was firm, eyes piercing. Don't save me. See what you've built. She gestured vaguely at the city beyond the window. Not the towers. The wreckage. Money's easy for you. Understanding? That's the work. Her refusal stung, a quiet devastation. No plea for aid, just a mirror to his soul. Eugene drove home in silence, the penthouse's opulence now oppressive. Late into the night, he delved into his own files, displacement reports buried in archives, spreadsheets of evictions, impact assessments glossed over. Names leaped out. Dwight Harlan, evicted Q3 2022. Ivan Petrov, Community Center, closed FY 2023. Statistics became stories, families fractured, elders isolated, futures dimmed. The real theft wasn't food from his kitchen. It was homes stolen through progress, dignity stripped by indifference, futures bartered for profit. Eugene's empire had plundered quietly, under legal cover, leaving Agnes to pick up the pieces. By dawn, resolve crystallized. He couldn't undo the past, but he could challenge the machine he'd built. Tomorrow, he'd call a board meeting, not to expand, but to dismantle the rot. His own empire would face the reckoning. By dawn, resolve had crystallized into action. Eugene showered, dressed in his sharpest suit, a armor for the battle ahead, and fired off emails summoning the board. Emergency session, 10 a.m. No excuses. As the sun crested the skyline, he reviewed his notes. Blueprints for radical restructuring, scribbled in the night's fever. No more predatory acquisitions. Community vetoes on developments. Profit caps redirected to reinvestment. It was heresy in their world. But to Eugene, it was redemption. The boardroom on the 58th floor gleamed with polished mahogany and floor-to-ceiling views of Manhattan's sprawl. 11 faces stared back at him. Partners who'd built Wallace Corp alongside him. Investors with stakes in the billions. Victoria Hale, his sharp-tongued CFO, tapped her pen impatiently. Marcus Reed, the venture lead, lounged with feigned nonchalance. They expected another conquest, not capitulation. Eugene stood at the head, projector humming behind him. "Thank you for coming on short notice. We're pivoting, effective immediately." He clicked through slides, maps of targeted neighborhoods overlaid with red zones of displacement. "Our model, aggressive expansion, minimal oversight, has profited us immensely. But at what cost? We've erased communities, pushed families to the brink, no more." Murmurs rippled. Victoria leaned forward. "Eugene, what's this about? A PR stunt?" "No stunt." He advanced to the core. Radical restructuring. Halt all non-essential acquisitions. Mandate community impact assessments with binding input from residents. Redirect 30% of annual profits to affordable housing funds. Job training. Clinics. Community-first development. We build with people, not over them. The room erupted. Marcus slammed his fist. "This is suicide. You're talking billions in lost revenue. Our projections for Q4 alone." "Quantify it," Eugene said calmly. Victoria pulled up her tablet, fingers flying. "Conservatively, halting acquisitions tanks our growth by 40%. Profit redirection? We're looking at a 25% valuation drop in the first year. Stock plummets, investors bail. We'd be vulnerable to takeovers." Numbers flashed on the screen, graphs dipping red, forecasts hemorrhaging. Eugene stared at them, the empire's lifeblood quantified in declines. Values over valuation. He'd chosen this path knowing the price. "Those are just numbers," he countered. "People aren't. I've seen the damage. Homes lost, lives upended. We caused it. Now we fix it." Resistance mounted like a storm. "You're unhinged," spat an investor, Harlan Fisk, rising. "Personal crisis? Fine. But don't drag us down." Two others nodded, gathering briefcases. "We're out. Expect our resignation letters." The door clicked shut behind them, the sound echoing like a guillotine. The remaining hesitated, eyes darting, calculations whirring. Reed crossed his arms. "Eugene, we've followed you for years, but this, it's not business." "It's better business," Eugene replied, voice steel. He stood firm, unflinching under their scrutiny. No backpedaling, no compromises. "If profit's your god, there's the door. But if you stay, we evolve." Silence stretched. Victoria sighed, pinching her bridge. "You're serious?" "Deadly." He clicked to the final slide, a proposal for new leadership roles. "We invite voices we've silenced, displaced residents as board advisors. People like Terry, former dock worker, knows the ground truth. Lillian, raising grandkids after eviction. They'll have veto power on projects." Gasps. "Outsiders dictating strategy?" Reed balked. "Partners," Eugene corrected. "Not charity. Equals. They've lived what we've ignored." The climax built in that room, not with shouts, but with the weight of risk. Eugene was gambling everything. His fortune, his legacy, the machine he'd forged from nothing. One wrong move, and it crumbled. But as the doubters filed out, 3 more leaving with curt nods, the holdouts shifted. Victoria met his eyes. "Hell, if we're reinventing, count me in, for now." Eugene nodded, the war far from won, but the first battle claimed. He'd risked it all, and, in the vulnerability, found strength. The hospital room had become Eugene's second office. He'd relocated his laptop, fielded calls from the vinyl chair beside Agnes's bed, and rescheduled half his calendar to maintain vigil. 3 days post-collapse, she was stable but weak. her complexion still pallid against the stark white sheets. The doctor spoke of recovery in weeks, not days. Rest, medication, lifestyle overhaul. Eugene listened, took notes, arranged private care. But Agnes's silence spoke louder than any prognosis. She watched him orchestrate from her bedside, eyes tracking his movements with an expression he couldn't decode. Gratitude? Suspicion? On the fourth morning, as he hung up from yet another frantic board update, she finally broke her silence. "You don't have to do this." Her voice was hoarse but steady. Eugene looked up from his phone. "Do what?" "Play savior." Agnes shifted against her pillows, wincing slightly. "I know what this is. Guilt, penance, you'll pay the bills. Upgrade the center. Write a check big enough to feel absolved." She met his gaze, unflinching. "Then what? Back to your tower. Conscience clears?" The accusation landed like a punch. Eugene set his phone down carefully. "That's not, isn't it?" She gestured weakly at the flowers on the nightstand, the fruit basket, the upgraded room he'd insisted on. "This is charity, Eugene. Easy for you. Write it off on your taxes. Tell yourself you're different now." He wanted to protest, to list the board battles, the resignations, the empire he was dismantling. But her words paralyzed him. Was she right? Had he simply traded one transaction for another? Guilt for redemption? A cleaner ledger? "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly. Agnes studied him, the silence stretching. When she spoke, her tone softened but remained firm. "I don't want saving. I want partnership." "Partnership?" he echoed. "Not your project. Not your charity case." She paused, gathering strength. "The center, the people we serve. They need a voice, not a benefactor. If you're serious about change, prove it. Give them power, not handouts." Eugene leaned forward. "How?" Agnes laid out her terms with the precision of someone who'd thought this through for years. Community leadership, real seats at the table, not token advisory roles. Transparency in every decision, every dollar spent, and presence. "Show up," she said. "Not once for a photo op. Weekly, monthly. Be there when it's messy, when there's no applause." He absorbed her conditions, each one a challenge to his instinct for control. "And if I agree? Then we start small. One project. Prove you mean it." Her gaze held his. "This isn't about redemption, Eugene. You don't get absolution. This is about showing up, day after day, even when it's hard." The shift between them was subtle but seismic, a recalibration from employer-employee to something uncharted. Eugene nodded slowly. "I'll do it. On your terms." Agnes searched his face for cracks, for the old dismissiveness. Finding none, she exhaled. "Then we start when I'm out of here. First project. Affordable housing on the Maple Street lot. Community designed. Community led." "Maple Street," Eugene repeated, the name tasting bitter. "Dwight's old block." "Agreed." For the first time in days, something like trust flickered in Agnes's eyes. Cautious, fragile, but real. She extended her hand across the bed rail, and Eugene took it. The grip firm despite her weakness. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but a beginning. By the time Agnes was discharged 2 weeks later, Eugene had laid groundwork. He'd convened the remaining board, Victoria, and 4 holdouts, and presented the Maple Street proposal. Pushback came swift. Projected ROI hovered at 8%, a fraction of their usual 25%. "Unacceptable," muttered one investor. But Eugene stood firm. invoking the new mandate. We measure success differently now, community impact over quarterly gains. The vote split, but majority carried. Maple Street was greenlit, contingent on community approval. Eugene personally drafted the outreach plan. Town halls, not presentations. Listening sessions, not pitches. He recruited Dwight, Terry, and Lillian as co-leads, offering stipends and veto power. "You design it," he told them. "We fund and build it." Their skepticism was palpable. "Why should we trust you?" Dwight challenged at the first meeting, held in the basement center Agnes had sustained. Eugene didn't deflect. "You shouldn't. Not yet, but I'm here to earn it." Agnes attended from a folding chair, still regaining her strength. She said little, but her presence anchored the room. When tensions flared, accusations of past harm, demands for guarantees, she intervened gently. "He's here. That's step one. Hold him to step two." The first project blueprint emerged over 6 grueling weeks. Community input shaped every detail. Affordable units for displaced families, green space for kids, a ground-floor clinic. Eugene absorbed the costs without flinching, even as his accountants winced. Victoria pulled him aside after one session. "We're hemorrhaging capital. Stocks down 18%. "I know," Eugene said. "Keep going." When the final design was unveiled, Dwight's family among the first approved tenants, applause rippled through the basement. Eugene stood to the side, not at the podium. This wasn't his victory. It was theirs. Afterward, Agnes found him outside, the alley quiet under streetlights. She looked healthier, color returning, though fatigue still shadowed her eyes. "You showed up," she said simply. "I did." She nodded, a small smile breaking through. "Then maybe this isn't about redemption after all. Maybe it's just about being human." Eugene felt the weight of her words settle. Not absolution, but acknowledgement. Trust, still cautious, still earned day by day, but real. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on me." Agnes shook her head. "I didn't save you, Eugene." "You're doing that yourself." She turned to head back inside, then paused. "Same time next week?" "Same time," he confirmed. As she disappeared into the warmth of the center, Eugene stood alone in the cold, the skyline glittering indifferently above. But for the first time in years, he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at the light spilling from the basement door, a small, steady glow in the darkness. And he knew, with quiet certainty, that this was where he belonged. The ribbon-cutting ceremony wasn't held in a ballroom. No press corps jostled for position. No champagne flutes glinted under chandeliers. Instead, 50 people gathered on a reclaimed sidewalk outside the Maple Street development on a crisp October morning, breath misting in the autumn air. Eugene stood to the side, hands in his pockets. Watching Dwight's daughter, 10 years old, gap-toothed, hold oversized scissors alongside her father. The red ribbon fluttered between freshly painted columns. "Ready?" Dwight asked, voice thick. She nodded, and together they cut. Applause erupted, not polite, not performative, but raw and joyful. Families surged forward, keys jangling, faces bright with disbelief. Maria, the former bodega owner, clutched her grandson's hand as they entered a ground-floor unit, sunlight streaming through new windows. Mr. Chen, the evicted elder, ran weathered fingers along a doorframe, murmuring in Mandarin. These weren't tenants. They were owners, equity holders in a building designed by their own hands. Eugene moved through the crowd, shaking hands, but not as the benefactor. He'd spent months at planning sessions, hauling supplies during builds, learning names and stories. Terry clapped his shoulder. "Never thought I'd see this day, Wallace. You actually showed up." "Still am," Eugene replied simply. Inside the community room, Agnes supervised the meal. Not alone this time. A dozen volunteers from the basement center worked alongside her, laying out platters of her signature stew, fresh bread, roasted vegetables. Eugene joined the line, accepting a bowl from Lillian, who winked. "Boss man's gotta eat too." He sat at a long table beside Ivan, the former teacher, whose school had reopened in the development's ground floor. Kids darted between adults, laughter echoing off walls that smelled of new paint and possibility. Eugene spooned stew, the familiar warmth spreading through him, and caught Agnes's eye across the room. She nodded once. Acknowledgement, not approval. He'd earned presence, not absolution. That was enough. Later, as dusk settled and the crowd thinned, Eugene found himself on the building's rooftop terrace, a green space the community had insisted on. City lights blinked awake below. The skyline he'd once owned now just backdrop. Agnes joined him, leaning against the railing, her coat pulled tight against the chill. "Thinking about that night?" she asked quietly. Eugene knew which night. The rain, the alley, the basement revelation. "Every day," he admitted. "I thought you were stealing. Turns out I was the thief." Agnes turned to him, her expression soft but unflinching. "You stole homes, Eugene, futures, but you're rebuilding them now. That counts for something. Does it balance the ledger?" "No," she said bluntly. "It never will." "But that's not the point." She gestured at the building below, lights glowing in windows where displaced families now slept. "The point is, you stopped watching from behind glass and started walking beside people. That's what changed everything." Eugene absorbed her words, the weight of transformation settling. He thought of the empire he'd built, towers etched with his name, profits that had seemed like legacy. But here, on this rooftop, surrounded by second chances and shared meals, he understood. Wealth hadn't changed him. It had isolated him, insulated him from the human cost of his ambition. Seeing Agnes had changed him, not her service, but her sacrifice, the quiet defiance of pouring herself into others when the world demanded nothing. She'd held a mirror to his hollowness, and he'd finally looked. "I used to think power meant control," Eugene said. "Boardrooms, bottom lines, leverage. But you taught me different." "I didn't teach you anything," Agnes countered. "You chose to listen. That's the difference." Below, families gathered in the courtyard, a bonfire crackling to life. Someone strummed a guitar. Children chased each other in circles. Eugene watched, not from his penthouse 40 floors removed, but here, among them, tangible and present. "Will you keep coming?" Agnes asked. "To the center, the projects? When are the cameras gone, and it's just the work?" "Every week," Eugene promised, "as long as you'll have me." Agnes smiled then, genuine and rare. "Then maybe you've finally learned what it means to be rich." Eugene raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Knowing when you have enough," she said. "And giving the rest away." They stood in companionable silence as night deepened, the city humming its indifferent song. But Eugene wasn't listening to the city anymore. He was listening to laughter from the courtyard, the crackle of fire, the murmur of lives rebuilding. He'd followed Agnes that rainy night, expecting to catch a thief. Instead, he'd discovered his own poverty, not of wealth, but of connection, of purpose, of seeing beyond himself. The truth he uncovered hadn't been in stolen bags or hidden basements. It had been in the mirror she'd held up, unflinching and patient, until he finally chose to look. Transformation, Eugene realized, wasn't sparked by guilt. It was born when power finally stopped talking and started listening. When it descended from towers and walked beside the people it had overlooked. Agnes turned to head downstairs, back to the warmth and the work. Eugene followed, no longer watching from the shadows, but walking beside her, into the light, into the mess, into the only legacy that mattered. Together,